Welcome to Talk Junkie. My name is Justin Perkins. Want to do the announcement stuff and like the kind of the ad stuff up front. I'm very proud of my friend and her new store, her bookstore, the Red Spot in Newton, Hazard, Kentucky. If you're looking for local books, or looking for books locally, and you live in this area around Perry County, Knott County, go check her out. It's the only place locally that you can get my books. Outside of that, you got to order them if you live away from here. You can find those on Amazon.com, blah, blah, blah. Check out Retro Resale on Facebook. You like old stuff, vintage stuff, retro stuff, 80s, 90s stuff, collectible stuff like that. Even have some just more modern type clothes on there. Have a lot of things. Just check it out. And if you're looking for a podcast not quite as serious as this one and a whole heck of a lot more fun, check out Raving Television Addict. It's on iTunes, YouTube. You can get it about anywhere. And like, share, and subscribe to this one. Speaking of podcasts, the way I come up with, I guess, like what I'm going to do a podcast about can come from anywhere. I get ideas from all over the place. A lot of times I'm just sitting and thinking. And sometimes you just have this perfect storm of things that hit. I listened to a podcast, I believe, you got to forgive me, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I believe it's WMMT does it, or somebody out of Letcher County does it, about people in the mountains and how they're viewed kind of outside the mountains. Then there was a post about coal mining and how the people of Eastern Kentucky is viewed on social media that I've seen. And then Raving Television Addict mentioned a movie that come out back in the 90s, a documentary called American Hollow. Maybe they called it American Holler, I can't remember. We call it Holler. I don't know what they called it. I think they called it American Hollow because, you know, it's beneath them to down themselves to the point of calling it a holler. They still have to refer to it as a holler, even though everybody they're interviewing in the documentary doesn't. One of my favorite podcasts I did was, or that I've done, is one that I've done not too long back called The Great Migration, about mountain people leaving Eastern Kentucky. I don't know what happened, and that is not on iTunes. You can still get it on the YouTube page. Jay Perkins is the YouTube page. Please check that out, because I think that's a really good story, and I'd like to get more comments and feedback on it, because literally I don't know if it was up on iTunes for a day, and I deleted it. I know what happened to an extent. I just don't know why it happened. It was in a queue that it shouldn't have been because it had already published, and when it wasn't removing itself from that queue, like an idiot, I went, oh, well, I can delete it from that queue, and I did, and it's gone for good. But we live in a very unique part of the country. Not to say we're the only people viewed in the same... we're not the only people viewed the way we're viewed. But it is a small pocket of people. I believe some people from Tennessee may be viewed the way Eastern Kentucky people are. Some people... of course, we don't consider them as good as us. But, you know... no, but seriously, some people probably look at them in a similar vein. West Virginia definitely gets it. Parts of Louisiana, around the bayou, definitely get it. There are these pockets of what they call backwards people and hillbillies, and how anybody outside of Eastern Kentucky and West Virginia gets the hillbilly moniker, I'm not exactly sure. I understand the Appalachian Mountain Range going down into Georgia and places like that, but you know, I've heard them call Indiana people hillbillies, you know, a couple of them, and that one doesn't make sense to me. But everyone, to some degree, based on where they're from, has a certain something associated with them, you know, whether it be the Valley Girls of California or the snotty hipsters of New York, or whatever it may be. everyone kind of gets a label, kind of gets stuck with something. But it just seems that people in the mountains, they get it a lot worse than everybody else. And I guess that's a matter of experience and opinion. Me growing up here, maybe I feel that it's more harsh than others feel it is. Others may feel like they get it more harshly than we do. But, I can't. I'm waiting for the evidence to prove that. And when I see it, then I will concede that Eastern Kentucky people don't get it worse than anybody. We are viewed as ignorant, unintelligent, backwards, racist, just as anything, any negative attribute you can think of pretty well gets assigned to us, as long as it's coupled with poverty and cold. And to some degree, some of that's true. To some degree, all stereotypes are true, otherwise they would not exist. To some degree, the ignorant hillbilly has existed, does exist, or will exist in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, it would not exist. It's just generally the stereotype is an exaggerated example of a true person, a real person. With mountain people or people of my area, you look at how they came to be here. And we've looked at this on other podcasts. I know I've referenced it at least once. Getting here was not easy for settlers. Surviving here was not easy for settlers. People like to put the mileage thing into account a lot of times. Well, it was a lot further journey from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast than it was from the East Coast to settle in Kentucky, especially Eastern Kentucky. However, it was a hard journey. There's different perils in each one. Native American conflict in one area, and just these rugged mountains coming into Kentucky. So each had its own obstacles, but it was a rough journey here. And it took a special kind of person to make it here and to survive here. And I truly believe that. And those people were no less educated than anyone else. The Midwest has an accent of its own. All southern states have an accent of their own. Louisiana most definitely has a dialect of its own. New York has phrases and wordings and expressions and dialects, things very much their own. None of those things from any of those areas, with the exception, I would say, of Louisiana, because that Creole is so unique and different and wonderful that it most definitely stands out. But with the exception of that, I think when it comes to language, mountain people stand out among other people, even among some other Southerners. I think the issue falls in that being all negative. I don't feel that it's all negative. I don't try to mask my accent or even say things completely differently than I would normally say them. I'm not as mountain, maybe you'd say, as some people, but I think that's just a result of influences I've had, maybe, I don't know what causes that, but I will say britches from time to time, And ain't is a word to me. I don't have an issue with saying. There's examples of everyday usage. Some people over-exaggerate it, even here in the mountains, on purpose. It's a desire to fit a mold. But people just attempting to be themselves, we very much are going to have things that in the way we speak that others don't have. And again, like I said, that's common throughout the entirety of the United States. It's sometimes maybe exaggerated by others on our part, and it's also we are looked at differently. Mountain people are looked at differently. We're viewed through a different lens. We get visits. I guess notoriously are the Kennedy visits to Eastern Kentucky. Kennedys love Eastern Kentucky as far as public exposure. They didn't mind to come and view Eastern Kentucky for presidential elections and things of that nature. In more recent years, I know Clinton has made trips to Eastern Kentucky. President, I'm pretty sure he was president at the time. President Kennedy did come, and then his brother Robert, I believe, came. President Trump has come. And I'm sure there's been others, and I don't know how close any of those got to actual Eastern Kentucky. I never paid, other than the Kennedys. I know the Kennedys made the trip actually to Eastern Kentucky. And speaking about the documentary, I believe, and this is without doing any research, and you don't have to research everything. I'm not making a factual claim. I'm saying I believe it was one of the Kennedy daughters or granddaughters of that nature. I don't think her last name. I think her last name was even Kennedy. That made American Hollow. That's how I remember it, and I'll double check that afterwards. And if I was wrong, I was wrong. And you can double check. It's okay to fact check things. And what kind of got me to go ahead and do this podcast, because I have a list of podcasts, and this subject was on it, but again, I heard this on another podcast, a gentleman named Brad and a gentleman named Mug. That's what they call him. That's what they've called him the whole time I've known him. We're discussing that documentary. And the fact that they're not ashamed of the people in that documentary. I'm not ashamed of anything about me or where I'm from. I'm not ashamed of those people in that documentary or what that documentary showed. But for a different reason, I believe, than these two gentlemen that were discussing it. And maybe for a different reason than other people. I'm very proud of where I'm from, and I think that our uniqueness makes us special, and I wouldn't want to see that changed. I think that uniqueness is what helped build the mountains, and it were the mountain people. But also, I understand that those people making that documentary came here looking to find what they considered the worst in us, looking to show what they considered the most pathetic example of us. They wanted to show all the negatives. They wanted to show everything they could that would be intriguing to outside audiences, portray us as less than, and help fuel the narrative that the rest of the country has about us. And I feel that they did that for the rest of the country. The difference is, mountain people didn't judge these people that they filmed. Mountain people, I don't have a problem. Let anybody watch that wants to watch it and go, my God, what kind of humans are they? They're mountain people. And not all of us are that way, and a lot of us are. And there's no shame in those people and who they are and what they did and how they acted. They were living life as it was dealt to them. There were no good intentions in that documentary. There were no good intentions in any of those trips that any of those presidents or candidates or anyone else ever made here. There were no good intentions. There were the intent to go to people you are better than and express how you are better than them, and to use pity or sympathy for them to bolster whatever it is you were going after, be it political party or just influence. So I hold no ill will. It is what it is. Such a small, trivial thing will not affect mountain people to that degree. Because mountain people have had to survive in a way and at a level that other people haven't had to survive. I think a lot of inner cities, especially throughout the history of mountains, could identify with how mountain people have had to live. I don't know if that's a comment that could garner any backlash or not. It seems anymore you can't say anything, but I feel that impoverished immigrant communities could understand mountain life and vice versa. I don't feel that a lot of other areas in the country, especially suburban areas, white-collar areas, and prosperous areas, can understand mountain people and mountain culture. From cooking to clothing to language to enterprise, mountain culture is about having little and doing as much as you can with it. Cook what you have. Cook what feeds the most, what gives you the heartiest meal, the most energy, the most food in your stomach so that you can go on. And do so with what is readily available, affordable, and abundant. You know, that's the basis for cooking. Cornbread and soup beans is not a fancy meal by any stretch of the imagination. You know, fairly inexpensive and abundant and available here, and it would feed a large family. And you know, mountain people grew up hard, and food was very much a part of that. My grandmother Minnie, when I was little, told me that when she was little, her mothers and sisters would cook, and then the husband and brothers would eat because they had to do the hard manual labor outside. You know, my grandmother didn't realize that the labor her and her mother were doing were just as hard and just as manual, but you know, her thing was they ate first, and then what was left over the sisters ate, and then what was left over from that, if anything, the mother ate. And that may have come from a sexist, ignorant place. It definitely did come from a very ignorant place, but it made very hard women. And you can make as many hard men as you want, and I'll tell you right now, hard men will not always make a strong, hard society if left just to hard men, but hard women will raise hard men and create a hard, strong society. So you can call women of Eastern Kentucky as ignorant and uneducated and whatever you want to call them, but I will put up my mother's work ethic and the life that my grandmother and others' mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers and great-great-grandmothers led against anyone's. And when it comes to human survival, and when it comes to value of life, and the value that they got out of their work and their family against anyone's. See, I'm not ashamed that I came from that. I'm, in reverse, I'm very proud of that. And that comes down to, you know, minimalism is mountainism. For the majority of mountain history, it was farm, And people, if anyone from the Midwest is listening to this, look up early Appalachian farming. It's not flat ground farming. It's not wide open fields. It's, my wife's grandfather told me that I was clearing out a place for a house seat, and there's all these rocks around these trees, and I'm talking to my wife's grandfather, and he moved those rocks, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, so that they could farm those hillsides. This farming is happening in every flat spot they have, yeah, but it's also happening on the hillsides and the mountainsides, and it's not your average farming, and so it started from that farming, and then came mining, and it wasn't Eastern Kentucky that needed coal, because the coal camps were barely equipped with electric, let alone most of the other homes. When coal mining first came in, a lot of people burnt coal for fires, but as far as electricity and things of that nature, and large scale, which its main purpose back in that time was manufacturing, and the Industrial Revolution did not happen in the mountains at the same time it happened everywhere else. So these large scale operations that needed this coal were not in Eastern Kentucky. So coal mining was not a product of need out of Eastern Kentucky, and not a product of greed out of Eastern Kentucky. It was companies from outside of Eastern Kentucky, interest from outside of Eastern Kentucky, coming in to mine a product to send outside of Eastern Kentucky. And on average, on percentage of use, remain that for the entirety of mining all the way up until today. We don't use a fraction of what we mine. And if the solution is to shut down all the coal plants and to stop using coal completely, and to go without or have significantly less electric, let me assure you, Eastern Kentucky, first and foremost, can survive that way. West Virginia can survive that way. These places that outside companies have gutted in the name of progress, these men whose only option to feed their family gave them black lung, these families and these regions can do without the coal you needed. So this hatred for the mountains based on coal, we want our mountains, we want our streams, we want all those things, and we would love to have them back. But they were getting raped and taken either way, with or without our help. I never worked in the mines. My grandfather on my mother's side never worked in the mines. My father never worked in the mines. My stepfather did work in the mines. My uncle did work in the mines. My wife's father drove a coal truck. It affects everyone in some way or another. But it's not what we wanted. You think them men wanted to lay in 30 inches of coal and that be their life? No. Not to die on a porch coughing up a lung. That's not what they were looking for. Not for a second. But it was what was available to them to feed their families. Now, it's obvious, why don't you leave? And that did happen. In the Great Migration, I spoke about my grandfather's time, how most of the men his age left, went north, went to Ohio, went to Indiana, went to Detroit, went to Michigan, went to these areas to work factory jobs, and how in my grandfather's eyes they were a lot like migrant Mexican workers. They worked cheaper, they worked harder, and the companies loved them. Everybody wanted hillbilly workers. They worked harder. They worked for less. They worked more hours. They done what you said, and they were so used to hard work that this factory work was easy to them. But the locals hated them because they took jobs, and they were mountain people. They were less than. A lot like how people look at migrant workers now. My grandfather opened my eyes up to that in the 90s, because in the 90s. Even then, there was talk politically, especially by President Clinton. That was one of the platforms on which he got reelected, about border walls and border security and not allowing in migrant workers and stuff. Bill Clinton was very big on that. And my grandfather said, if they could have built a wall around eastern Kentucky, they would have, to keep us out of the factories in the north. And he said if people were willing to work, migrant work wouldn't be an issue. And that's true. That's very true to some degree. I mean, there's parts of that are debatable. So work, like food, was a necessity thing. Now, our dialect and how we talk and things we say, words we use, phrases, cadence, those types of things are a result of separation, are a result of being isolated. When people came here, pretty well everybody forgot about us for a long time, including the government. When you were needed, North and South remembered you during the Civil War because they both needed you. Because it was just about bodies. And, if the governor needed votes, I don't know what kind of weight back in the day mountain votes carried, but, we don't even get the governors in my lifetime very, very seldomly express any interest in. We are the butthole of the state to them, so they don't care. But that isolation led to a development of a lot of things. I mean, obviously, culture and ritual is derived from the people around you, and that ours was derived in isolation. Mountain people here amongst family, friends, and neighbors, but very little outside interaction. Newspaper and radio, TV coming later. With the birth of TV, we had somewhat of a glimpse into the outside, but the outside had very little glimpse and, not really that much more influence onto us. And so, coming up even into the 90s when they would make things like the documentary American Hollow and things of that nature, it's a result of finding this place that's still in isolation, that's still different enough from the rest of the world. And in all ways, we were behind a little bit on everything because influence hit us at a slower pace. And again, that's true for many parts of the country. It's not something that's just relegated to us, but it's something that seems like oftentimes other places don't have it pointed out as much as that they're behind on this or they're behind on that. So, to me, the big change in society came with two things in eastern Kentucky. The internet gave us outside interaction coming in. You understand? We had the ability to reach out and have people reach out to us. And to me, that was a fairly significant difference. It was something that allowed for growth and negative reinforcement in some cases. But it definitely changed us and our culture to some degree on very small levels, because mountain culture is very strong and even to this day still holds on in a way that other areas struggle to. And I forget what we were even discussing, but I was talking to somebody from Lexington, and we were talking about, this has been almost 20 years ago, and they said, well, you all still don't do whatever it is. And whatever that was, I said basically to the effect that Well, it's because we still know it's not right. And I don't remember the exact conversation we were having. Why it sticks out to me is because they had accepted something that I felt was wrong, something that after a little bit of conversation, he and I both agreed were wrong, but they had accepted it based on the fact that it had become culturally relevant. I guess it had become culturally acceptable to a certain segment of Kentucky people, whatever it was. And I said, well, it's because we still know it's wrong, despite the fact that we have access to it. And I think mountain people are like that. They have a strong integrity when it comes to certain beliefs. But the other thing in the 2000s that came that kind of changed mountain people, it is the opioid epidemic. It had the strongest and most long-lasting effects on mountain people, and the most negative. We went from a hard-working, family-based, forgotten people living impoverished to a hard-working, family-based, impoverished people addicted and exploited for those addictions. We become important to Purdue Medical and Big Pharmaceutical because we had a large client base for their synthetic heroin. And they exploited that customer base. The rest of the country had issues too, but generally in areas like ours, impoverished and lower income areas. But it filtered into the suburbs, it filtered in everywhere. Everyone ended up experiencing and having the same issues that we had. They just meant more when they were outside the mountains. Now that that's gone, and it is to a large degree, there's other issues drug-wise facing mountain people now and facing other people. But we look back on that, and even though it became something that had a nationwide impact, it's looked at as a very mountain issue a lot of times to a lot of people outside the mountains. Especially if somebody knew someone from the mountains or one of the news stories from the mountains regarding oxys or something of that nature, and they didn't have something personally impacting them in their area, then that to them, a lot of people like that, it's a purely mountain issue. But families rose up in that. Mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles, especially grandparents, grandmothers and grandfathers, rose up and raised kids and raised great-grandkids and raised grandchildren and helped addicted people. The opioid crisis shows you a lot about a lot of people in a lot of parts of the United States of America, but the one thing the opioid crisis shows you is that Kentucky families are strong. Eastern Kentucky families are some of the strongest there are, and their willingness to fight and do for their kids and to try to help others regardless of relation is amazing. And we can sit and cherry pick all the good and all the bad we want. But if it's gun to your head, weigh out the good, weigh out the bad, I'll take people from Eastern Kentucky any day of the week. Any day of the week. It's good people. And we're represented a lot of ways. One segment of the country believes we're the Beverly Hillbillies. You know, before they found the oil. Another segment believes we're all running down here with bow and arrows, raping each other like Deliverance. And then there's a segment that believes we're all interbred and barefoot and wearing overalls, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with being barefoot. or wearing overalls. I don't own overalls, but I love to go barefoot. But then there's a segment of the population that believe we're in constant struggle and need of help. And while there are Beverly Hillbilly types, and there are inbred types, and there are barefoot and types, and there are types in need of help, those are just small portions of our demographics of our people, just like it is anywhere else. We just talk different. It's amazing that in a country like the United States of America, who we are and what we are, and I feel that we're mostly good as a people, that some people still look at something like geographic location and accent and put a judgment on people that they are less than because of where they live and how they sound. It sounds too stupid to even say, but that's what it is. But I'm proud to be from the mountains. And would I like to be out of the mountains? Yes. I say that a lot. And I think people give me grief over that because they think it's a slight at the mountains. It's not. I can't imagine living any one place my entire life. So, no, I don't want to die here. Or maybe I'd die here, but just not live all the time in between here. I want to be everywhere. At least once, maybe twice. So that's not a slight on the mountains. Are there things that frustrate me? Yes. There's currently, in certain areas and certain counties, there's a larger population of people who want us to stay exactly where we are and not grow and not have anything new and not expand. That population of people are higher than the population of people who want new things, who want to grow, who want to better ourselves. And in some areas, it seems like that's the case, but it's really just a case of the ones that say they want growth, don't want to do any work. It varies. It really does. But then there's areas where growth is abundant, despite any protest. Like I said, my friend has a very wonderful bookstore who they just had a wonderful reading by some big authors, and it's a beautiful thing to see in Hazard, Kentucky, you know. And there's people who own buildings in Hazard, Kentucky who are keeping rent massive so that they'll stay empty, so that for tax purposes they've got a write-off. And those people don't want to see growth. There's people like my friend who's working to ensure growth. And in one thing that I always point out to people is Whitesburg, Kentucky. The local business and the local growth in Whitesburg, there's a music store there called Roundabout Music. Albums, tapes, CDs, stereo equipment. Wonderful little locally owned, quaint little corner store that I love. And I couldn't recommend it enough. There's tattoo shop. There's local restaurants. There's a small local music venue. There's WMMT radio station with the Apple shop and stuff there. There's a moonshine distillery, I believe it is what that is. It's a beautiful little picture of growth, and that's happening here and happening in the mountains. So people outside of here see us a lot of different ways, but that's the good thing about being from the mountains. We don't really give a crap how they see us. We like us, and we just got to work on keeping us together and as one. But thanks for listening. Podcast. I know these haven't been coming as frequently, but there's been a lot going on for me right now, and I can't do them as frequently as I have been. So, again, if you missed the Great Migration, look it up on YouTube. It's there. Like, share, do whatever you want with these. Enough people's listening at this point that I'm going to keep doing it. If new people come, awesome. If they don't, that's awful. I wish I could get more, but it is what it is. Y'all have a great day.